I never thought I could feel invisible in my own life, but that is exactly what happened. My name is Julia, and I am 36 years old. Once upon a time, I believed I had a marriage worth fighting for, a love story that could endure disappointments, delays, even tragedies. I told myself again and again that love meant patience, that love meant loyalty, that love meant staying even when the other person drifted away. But what I didn't realize, what I refused to realize, was that loyalty without respect is just another kind of prison. It began so quietly I almost didn't notice. My husband and I had been married for 8 years, and in the beginning we were like many couples, full of dreams, plans, and late-night whispers about the future. We wanted children so badly. I remember how my heart leapt the first time he suggested painting the second bedroom soft yellow for the baby. We chased that dream for years. We went to clinics, counted cycles, endured endless injections and humiliating questions from doctors. Every month was a cycle of hope and heartbreak. A single line on a test would reduce me to tears. I felt my body betray me over and over. At first we grieved together. He held me when I cried, and I whispered reassurances into his chest when his voice broke with frustration. But after a while, I noticed something change. He grew quieter, colder, as if the silence of disappointment was swallowing him whole. And me, I shut down. I stopped reaching out for him in bed. I stopped trying to dress up for dinner. I let the distance between us spread until it became a wall. It hurt too much to hope, so I convinced myself it was easier not to feel. That was the first fracture. But the true breaking point came later when my sister moved into our home. She had just gone through a messy divorce, the kind that dragged neighbors into shouting matches and summoned police cars to the driveway at midnight. She arrived at our door with her 2 children bags stuffed with clothes and a look of desperation. What could I do? She was my only sister. I begged my husband to let her stay, and though he hesitated, he agreed. I promised it would only be a few days. But a few days stretched into weeks, then into months, until suddenly I looked around and realized my home wasn't mine anymore. Her children's toys littered the floor, her clothes mingled with ours in the laundry basket, her voice filled every room with sarcasm and criticism. My husband was patient at first, but eventually I saw the resentment harden in his eyes. He would come home from work exhausted, and instead of peace, he found chaos. He tried to talk to me about boundaries, about asking her to find her own place. But I shut him down. I told him he was being insensitive. I told him family meant sacrifice. I told him things I didn't even fully believe because the truth was, I was terrified of being alone with him in that quiet house, where our dreams had died. And then one day I heard my sister mock him at the dinner table, and instead of defending him, I laughed. I can still see the look in his eyes when I did that, the flicker of hurt, the way his jaw tightened before he fell silent. I humiliated him, the one person who had once been my partner, and I can't take that moment back. Our bedroom became hers. Her children slept in our bed while he wandered to the couch or the guest room. Our marriage, once fragile but intact, was now a house hollowed out from within. Still, I told myself love meant endurance, and I tried to pretend that nothing irreversible had happened. But then came the barbecue. I didn't plan it, at least not consciously. My parents, aunts, cousins, they all showed up in our backyard one Saturday afternoon, laughing and grilling burgers while I set the patio table. The house was buzzing with voices and music, but something was missing him. My husband walked in hours later looking startled, as if he had stepped into a stranger's celebration. I saw the confusion flicker across his face, but before I could speak, my sister's voice cut through the crowd like a knife. "You know," she said loudly, glass in hand, "if Julia disappeared tomorrow, I don't think anyone would even notice." The laughter that followed was like a wave crashing over me. People chuckled, shook their heads, nudged each other. My own family laughed at the thought of me vanishing, as if I was already half gone. I forced a smile, my throat tight, my heart pounding. My husband lifted his drink in a mock toast, his voice flat but steady. Challenge accepted. The yard fell silent for a moment, then conversations resumed as if nothing had happened. But I knew. I saw it in his eyes. Something inside him had broken beyond repair. That night, when the last guest left and the lights dimmed, he packed a small bag. I didn't stop him. Part of me screamed silently to beg him not to leave, but my foolish pride, kept my lips sealed. On the kitchen counter the next morning, I found the divorce papers. A yellow sticky note rested on top with 3 haunting words: "You noticed yet?" It felt like the floor gave way beneath me. I stood there staring at those words, and for the first time in years I realized how completely I had failed him. He vanished after that. Just gone. No trace, no calls, no messages. He disappeared like a ghost, deleting his accounts, erasing his tracks. Weeks passed, then months. My anger burned at first. How dare he abandon me? How dare he walk away from this marriage without a fight? But anger is a poor disguise for grief. Slowly, the rage drained, leaving only regret. I began writing to him email after email. At first, they were sharp, accusing, demanding answers, but with each message, my voice softened. I told him about the foreclosure notices, about working 2 jobs just to survive, about finally sending my sister away because I realized how destructive she had been. I admitted what I never could face before, that I had taken him for granted, that I thought he would endure anything because he loved me, and that I had been wrong. One night, as I wrote through tears, I typed the words that had been clawing at my chest: "I miss you. Not because I need help, but because I finally see what you gave up to hold everything together." It has been a year since he disappeared. I sometimes wonder where he is now, if he is happy, if he has found peace. And I wonder if he will ever read those words, if he will ever know that I finally understood too late that love is not endurance without tenderness, not sacrifice without reciprocity. Love requires 2 people carrying the weight together, and I had let him carry it alone until he collapsed under the burden. The weeks after he vanished blurred together like a smear of colors on wet canvas. I woke up each morning half expecting to hear his footsteps in the hallway, the clink of his mug against the counter, the sigh he always made before his first sip of coffee. Instead, there was silence. The kind of silence that hums heavy and oppressive, filling every corner until it feels louder than any sound could be. At first, I told myself he was making a point, that he would cool off and come back when he realized the world outside wasn't kinder than the one we had built. I kept checking the driveway, kept waiting for the familiar shape of his car to pull up. But days stretched into weeks, and the driveway stayed empty. My calls went straight to voicemail, my texts, unread, my letters unanswered. And then came the realization that he hadn't just walked out to clear his head. He had disappeared deliberately, carefully, like someone who had been planning it for a long time. I raged. Oh, how I raged. Anger was easier to hold than grief, easier to scream than to sob. I threw plates against the kitchen wall until they shattered into 100 sharp pieces. I shouted into the void, calling him selfish, a coward, heartless. I told myself he was weak, that only weak men abandon their wives. But late at night, when my anger burned out and left only ashes, I lay awake in the cold stretch of our bed, clutching a pillow and whispering his name into the dark. Weak men don't plan an escape so carefully, I thought. Weak men don't vanish without a trace. No, it was not weakness. It was choice. And that choice cut deeper than any blade. When the bills started to pile up, I felt the weight of his absence in a new way. He had always been steady, reliable, the one who kept us afloat when my sister's chaos spilled over into every corner of our lives. Without him, I was drowning. The bank letters came in bold red ink, each one more threatening than the last. I picked up shifts at 2 jobs, mornings at a cafe, nights at a local grocery, dragging myself home in the dead of night, only to collapse into bed and dream of the life I used to complain about. My sister, of course, was no help. She had overstayed her welcome long before he left, but for a while I clung to her presence like a raft. It was easier to have someone in the house, even if she mocked me, even if she made everything harder. But the truth eventually roared too loud to ignore. She wasn't rescuing me. She was sinking me further. One night, after another fight that ended with her slamming the door, I finally told her to leave. She stormed out, her children trailing behind her with tired eyes, and suddenly I was alone. For the first time in years, I stood in the middle of my living room and heard only my own breathing. It should have felt like peace. Instead, it felt like punishment. I had defended her against him again and again, dismissed his pleas, laughed when she belittled him. And in doing so, I had betrayed the very man I vowed to protect. That was when I started writing. I found one of his old email accounts, the one he used years ago for freelance work. At first, I wasn't sure if it was even active, but I wrote anyway. My first messages dripped with fury. I told him he had abandoned me, that he had no right to vanish, that he had failed me. But with each message, something inside me cracked. I ran out of rage. The words softened, shifted. Soon I was writing not to accuse, but to confess. I get it now, I typed one night, my hands shaking over the keyboard. I understand why you were so distant. I just wish I hadn't been so blind. I cried as I hit send, and once the dam broke, the truth spilled out in every message. I told him about the house slipping away, about the exhaustion of double shifts, about the empty chair across the table at dinner that felt like it mocked me every night. I told him about my sister, about how I had finally seen through her manipulations, how I realized too late that he had been right all along. I wish you'd come home, I wrote in another message. Not because I need help, but because I miss you. Because I finally understand what you gave up trying to hold everything together. Weeks later, I opened his inbox again and reread my own words. Dozens of messages pouring my soul into the void with no reply. Yet I couldn't stop. It was like speaking into a confessional booth where silence was the only answer, and maybe that silence was deserved. Then one morning, as the first light spilled through the blinds, I sat with a cup of instant coffee staring blankly at the screen. I typed something I had never admitted even to myself. I was stupid. I took you for granted. I thought you'd always be around no matter how much I ignored you. I still haven't signed the divorce papers. I keep hoping one day you'll walk through the door. I pressed send and let my forehead rest against the table. The words glowed on the screen like a wound I had finally exposed. It has been nearly a year since he left. A year of silence, of survival, of regret. A year of me learning the difference between endurance and love. I once believed that staying, no matter how cold, how lonely, how painful, was proof of devotion. But now I see that true love is not about who stays the longest, but about who still chooses you when everything else falls apart. And I had stopped choosing him long before he stopped choosing me. One afternoon, as I sat folding laundry in the quiet, I caught myself smiling faintly at the memory of him humming while fixing the squeaky cabinet door in the kitchen. It was such a small, ordinary thing. And yet in that moment, I understood those little acts of care had been his way of saying, I love you, long after words had failed us. And I had been too blind, too bitter to notice. It was exactly 1 year since he vanished when fate decided to test me. By then, I had grown used to the quiet. My life had become small work bills, chores, and the occasional message I sent into the void of his old email account, words I wasn't sure he would ever read. My body moved through the routines, but my mind? My mind lived in the past. It replayed every moment I had ignored him, every time I had laughed at his expense, every time I defended my sister instead of the man I married. Regret had become my shadow, and I carried it everywhere. That morning was no different. I woke up before dawn, pulled on my cafe uniform, and trudged through another double shift. By evening, my feet ached, my back screamed, and my soul felt hollow. I stopped by a small grocery for milk and bread, and on my way out, the glow of a coffee shop across the street caught my eye. Something about it tugged at me, a memory, a craving. He used to love small cafes, the kind tucked away from main streets, where the coffee was brewed strong and the air smelled of roasted beans instead of burnt corporate chains. I crossed the street without thinking, stepped inside, and inhaled the rich, bitter warmth. I ordered a small black coffee just like he used to, and while I waited at the counter, I heard it. My name. At first, I ignored it. People called my name often enough. But then it came again, firmer, more surprised, Julia. I turned and my breath caught in my chest. It wasn't him, it was Ryan, one of our old mutual friends. His eyes widened, like he'd just seen a ghost. We exchanged awkward pleasantries, and I tried to keep the conversation brief, but Ryan's gaze kept flicking over me with concern. I excused myself quickly, clutching the paper cup so tightly I almost crushed it. But as I walked home that night, a terrible thought gnawed at me. If Ryan had seen me, could he see him too? Did that mean he was nearby? Less than a week later, my answer came. There was a knock at my cabin door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart thudded wildly as I peered through the curtain. And there he was, my husband, my ghost. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hands trembled against the fabric, my lungs forgot how to breathe. When I finally opened the door, the sight of him nearly buckled my knees. He looked older, rougher, his beard grown out, his clothes simple, his eyes sharper than I remembered. Life away from me had etched itself into his face, and yet there was still something achingly familiar in the curve of his mouth, the tilt of his head. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice flat-guarded. I broke. I collapsed right there in the doorway, tears spilling faster than I could stop them. "I'm sorry," I sobbed. "I didn't know it had gotten that bad. I didn't know I was breaking you piece by piece. I should have listened. I should have seen you." The words tumbled out desperate and messy, but they were all I had. For so long I had hidden behind pride, but pride had cost me everything. He didn't interrupt. He didn't touch me. He just listened, his expression unreadable. When I finally ran out of breath, I looked up at him, searching for any sign of forgiveness, of love, of the man who once promised me forever. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him, and met my eyes. His voice was calm, steady, but it cut like a knife. "I'll come back," he said, "but only to end this the right way. I'll sign what needs signing. We'll wrap this up like adults. But I can't be your husband again. Not after everything. Not after what your sister put me through. Not after you stood by and let it happen." The finality in his voice crushed me. There was no anger, no rage, no trembling, just certainty. I wanted to beg, to fall at his feet and promise to change, but the truth was, he was right. I had stood by. I had let it happen. And love doesn't survive long in the soil of indifference. He walked away then, and I didn't stop him. I couldn't. My tears blurred him into shadow until the night swallowed him whole. Afterward, I sat on the steps staring into the dark, and for the first time I understood the brutal truth. People only begin to see the value of something or someone when it's already gone. And sometimes even when you finally understand, it's too late. The night he left me standing on those steps was the longest night of my life. I didn't sleep, didn't even try. I just sat there staring into the dark woods beyond the cabin, listening to the wind rattle the leaves, as if the world itself was whispering that I had lost him for good. My chest ached with a pain I couldn't soothe, because this wasn't the kind of pain that time or medicine could heal. It was the kind that carved itself into your bones and stayed there, reminding you every time you moved of what you'd done. The next morning I returned to the city, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Bills don't stop arriving just because your heart has shattered. I went back to the routine I had built in his absence: long shifts, empty house, silence so heavy it followed me from room to room. But something inside me had shifted. Seeing him again, hearing his voice, knowing with absolute certainty that he had chosen to walk away forever, broke whatever fragile denial I had been living in. He wasn't coming back, and I had no one to blame but myself. I thought often about the barbecue, about the moment my sister's cruel joke echoed through the yard. If Julia disappeared tomorrow, I don't think anyone would even notice. The laughter that followed had burned me alive. I replayed it endlessly, wondering if that was the moment he decided he was done. Maybe he'd been building up to it for years, but that was the strike that split the foundation, and I had stood there frozen, not defending him, not defending us. Instead, I let the silence swallow me whole. The emails I had sent to his old account haunted me. I imagined him reading them, maybe shaking his head, maybe laughing bitterly, maybe ignoring them altogether. But then, sometimes late at night, I let myself imagine something else. I pictured him pausing, his eyes softening for just a moment, remembering the woman I once was, before bitterness made me cruel. I pictured him almost replying, almost reaching out before the memory of all I had done stopped him. That almost became my prison. One afternoon, months later, I walked through our old neighborhood on my way home from work. The house we once shared stood there weathered, a for sale sign planted in the yard. The garden I had once tended was overgrown, weeds choking the flowers. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, staring at the windows, remembering how we used to sit on the porch in the evening sipping tea and talking about nothing. It hit me then: houses are not homes, people are. And I had driven mine away. Friends and family asked about him less and less. At first they offered sympathy, advice, gossip, but eventually they grew quiet, moving on with their own lives. I became the woman with the sad story, the cautionary tale whispered at gatherings. And in some ways I deserved that. I had chosen silence when I should have chosen love. But life, cruel as it is, doesn't stop for regret. I kept working, kept moving, kept breathing. And slowly I learned to sit with the silence instead of fighting it. It became my teacher. In its heavy quiet, I realized something I wish I had understood years ago. Love cannot survive when one person carries all the weight. It collapses under the strain, leaving only rubble behind. A year and a half passed before I heard about him again. Not directly, never directly, but through whispers, through friends of friends. He was alive, doing fine, keeping to himself. No wife, no children, no new family. Just a man who had learned the value of peace after years of chaos. I should have felt relief knowing he was well, but instead, I felt an ache that never left me, because his peace came at the cost of us. I sit here now telling you this story, not because I expect sympathy or redemption, but because I know what it means to lose something you can never replace. I lived years convinced that endurance was the same as devotion, that holding on while everything crumbled was proof of love. But the truth is, love is not proven by how long you stay in misery. Love is proven by how fiercely you choose each other again and again, even when life tries to tear you apart. And when you stop choosing, when you stand by and let the person you promised forever to carry the weight alone, you lose them. Maybe not immediately, maybe not dramatically, but eventually they will walk out the door, and you will watch the back of them disappear into the night, knowing you handed them the reason to leave. So if you are listening to me now, if you are in a relationship where your presence is being taken for granted, or worse, if you are the one doing the taking for granted, hear my words. Don't wait until absence teaches you what presence was worth. Don't laugh when your partner is mocked. Don't let silence speak where love should. Don't assume they will always stay just because they always have. Because one day they might not. And when that day comes, you'll understand what I now live with every single morning, that some mistakes are irreversible. Some lessons arrive too late, and some goodbyes echo long after the door has closed. If my story has touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, or if you've learned the hard way the cost of silence. I'd love to hear your story too.